ABC General Hospital reveal that what makes Port Charles so dangerous is not the violence people can see coming, but the kind that arrives wearing charm, beauty, and apparent reinvention. That is exactly why Jacinda has become such a fascinating threat. On the surface, she looks like a woman who escaped the wreckage of her former life and somehow landed in the glow of a second chance. She is drawn close to Michael, she has carved out a place for herself at Crimson, and she carries the polished confidence of someone who has learned how to move through wealthy rooms without flinching. Yet the very perfection of that transformation makes it feel unstable, almost too clean for a town built on buried crimes and unfinished revenge. Recent GH developments have indeed placed Jacinda closer to Michael and Crimson, while Sidwell and Cullum remain dangerous forces around Port Charles, which makes her position especially combustible. The darker version of this story begins with a simple truth. Jacinda knows far more than she has ever admitted, and the secrets she is carrying do not belong to her alone. They reach backward into the long, poisonous legacy of Nelle and outward into something even more dangerous, because Delilah is not merely another forgotten name drifting around the edges of Port Charles. Delilah is the kind of secret that reshapes old tragedies once exposed. In this version of the story, Delilah is tied to a hidden network of identities, births, cover-ups, and quiet transactions, the sort of buried history powerful people believed would remain dead forever. Jacinda did not stumble onto that truth by accident. She was brought close to it, trained around it, and eventually trapped by it. What once looked like survival became recruitment. What once looked like luck became design. That is why Jacinda's connection to Michael should never be read as simple romance. It should feel like the most dangerous kind of emotional infiltration, because genuine affection and manipulation can coexist in Port Charles until they become impossible to separate. Michael, already worn down by betrayal, custody pain, family pressure, and the never-ending fallout of other people's lies, is exactly the kind of man someone like Jacinda could be sent to exploit. He is powerful but emotionally exposed, rich but exhausted, surrounded by legacy yet privately vulnerable. If Jacinda's mission is to get close to the Quartermaines, to expose their weaknesses, or to help dismantle them from within, then Michael is the perfect point of entry. And the most painful twist would be that she did not expect him to be kind. She did not expect him to look at her as if she were more than her past. She did not expect to feel something real while carrying a lie large enough to destroy him. The possibility that Nelle is not truly dead turns that tension into something explosive. Michael has spent too much of his life trying to recover from the wreckage Nelle left behind. Her name is not just attached to chaos in his world, it is attached to humiliation, rage, trauma, manipulation, and the kind of emotional corrosion that does not disappear just because time passes. If Jacinda becomes the vessel through which the truth begins to surface, then Michael is not just being deceived by another woman. He is being dragged back into the psychological prison he thought he had escaped. The shock would not simply come from learning Nelle may still be alive. It would come from realizing that the universe has found a new way to wound him using the same old scars. And in true Port Charles fashion, that revelation would not arrive all at once. It would come in fragments, a familiar phrase, a photograph that should not exist, a hidden payment, a whispered name, a reaction Jacinda cannot fully suppress. The horror would build not from a single confession, but from the slow realization that the nightmare was never over. That is where Delilah becomes crucial. Delilah should function like the shadow behind the shadow, the buried link that makes the Nelle mystery larger and uglier than anyone imagined. Perhaps Delilah knew the truth about Nelle's survival. Perhaps she was involved in moving money, forging records, or protecting the chain of secrecy that allowed certain women to vanish and reemerge under new identities. Perhaps she knew something even more devastating, something tied to Nina, and the possibility that Jacinda herself is another child hidden inside the same twisted family history. That possibility alone is enough to detonate several lives at once. If Jacinda is another daughter of Nina, then her presence near Michael becomes unbearable on multiple levels. It becomes personal, grotesque, and emotionally radioactive. It would mean that Michael, who already shares a catastrophic history with Nelle and the damage tied to Nina's motherhood, has unknowingly opened his heart to another woman whose existence is bound to the same bloodline of secrets and destruction. For Nina, that kind of twist would be emotionally annihilating. She has already lived through the agony of lost children, delayed truths, and the shame of realizing that pieces of her own life were hidden from her by forces stronger and crueler than she understood. To discover that Jacinda might be another daughter would not feel like a miracle, it would feel like punishment. It would force her to relive the guilt of everything she failed to see, everything she was denied, and everything her fractured family history has done to the people around her. Worse, it would make her question whether Jacinda came into Michael's orbit by fate or by orchestration. A mother's instinct would tell her to protect. A guilty conscience would tell her she may already be too late. And if Jacinda has been using Michael while unknowingly sharing a blood tie to Nina, the emotional ugliness becomes almost unbearable, because every tenderness becomes contaminated by tragedy. But Jacinda's danger does not stop with family secrets. It expands into a criminal alliance that is far larger, colder, and more strategic than she can comfortably control. Sidwell and Cullum are not the kind of men who tolerate loose ends, and Jacinda has become one. The more she knows, the more unstable her value becomes. Sidwell would see her as a liability the moment he suspects she has information connected to Nelle, Delilah, or whatever buried operation allowed these secrets to survive. Cullum, with his own survival instincts sharpened by paranoia, would understand that Jacinda's existence threatens more than one scheme. She is connected to Michael, close enough to hear Quartermain tensions, vulnerable enough to be pressured, and frightened enough to make mistakes. In a town like this, that makes her both useful and disposable. And then there is Sonny, whose presence transforms the nature of the threat. Sonny would not fear Jacinda herself. He would fear the ripple effect she could create around Michael and the family. The moment Sonny senses that Michael is being drawn into another web of manipulation, especially one connected to criminal players like Sidwell and Cullum, his protective instincts would turn savage. That is where the pressure on Jacinda becomes unbearable. She would not just be dodging political corruption and criminal intimidation. She would be caught between men who each respond to danger in radically different ways. Sidwell would use calculation. Cullum would use panic. Sonny would use force. And Jacinda, no matter how clever she is not built to withstand all three forever. This is where Ezra Boyle fits with chilling precision. Ezra is not simply a corrupt politician in the background. He is the perfect architect for a scheme that relies on public respectability covering private rot. If Jacinda once had ties to him, then those ties can easily become the rope around her neck. Ezra has every reason to hate the Quartermains, every reason to manipulate public narratives, and every reason to weaponize someone like Jacinda if it helps him weaken Michael or embarrass the family. The most disturbing version of the story is not that Jacinda willingly works for Ezra with full malice. It is that she may have started by doing one favor, telling one lie, passing along one piece of harmless-looking information, and then found herself unable to stop. People like Ezra never need full loyalty. They only need leverage, a debt, a secret, a fear, a document, a recording, a threat. Once he has that, he does not need Jacinda to be evil. He only needs her to be trapped. That moral entrapment is what gives Jacinda real dramatic power. If she were simply a cold schemer, the story would be smaller. But if she is a woman trying to outrun her past while being pulled back into it by men who know exactly how to exploit her, then every choice becomes agonizing. She may genuinely care for Michael and still betray him. She may want to tell Nina the truth and still remain silent. She may hate what Sidwell and Cullum are turning her into while continuing to obey because she knows what happens to people who disobey. That contradiction is where the emotional heat lives. She is not only hiding secrets, she is becoming one. Michael's role in all of this should be brutal and deeply personal. He has already been reshaped by too many women entering his life, carrying secrets, damage agendas, or all three. The idea that Jacinda could represent yet another betrayal would ignite a fury in him that goes beyond heartbreak. It would strike at his pride, his judgment, and his exhausted hope that he can still recognize sincerity when it is in front of him. The possibility that Nelle is alive would be enough to stun him. The possibility that Jacinda helped conceal it would devastate him. The possibility that Jacinda is another daughter of Nina would turn devastation into something closer to psychological collapse, because then his emotional life would begin to feel less like a series of tragic accidents and more like a carefully arranged punishment. He would not know whom to hate first. Jacinda for lying, Nina for representing another generation of hidden truth, Ezra for using people like weapons, or himself for once again opening the door to someone who may have come to destroy him. And yet, the cruelest possibility is that Jacinda may not be the mastermind at all. The real power could be the unseen organization standing behind her, the shadow force that recruited, positioned, and now controls her. If that boss figure finally arrives in Port Charles, the whole storyline changes shape. Sidwell and Cullum become nervous, not because they suddenly grow consciences, but because they realize they were never as high in the hierarchy as they believed. Their fear would be deliciously deserved. Men who built their confidence on intimidation would suddenly understand what it feels like to be managed, audited, and potentially erased. If Jacinda's true handlers view Sidwell and Cullum as messy, expendable assets, then both men could find themselves in genuine danger for the first time. That shift would electrify the story. It would create a temporary and highly unstable overlap in motives, where monsters who usually hunt others begin scrambling to protect themselves. Jacinda would then become the contested center of multiple wars at once. Sidwell would want her silenced before she talks. Cullum would want her controlled before she defects. Ezra would want her useful before she breaks. Sunny would want her nowhere near Michael unless she tells the whole truth. Nina would want answers she may not be emotionally prepared to hear, and Michael would want the one thing Port Charles rarely gives anyone, honesty before more damage is done. That demand alone could shatter Jacinda, because honesty is no longer something she can offer without detonating the lives around her. The story becomes even more compelling when Jacinda is forced into a final series of impossible choices. Does she continue using Michael to serve Ezra's agenda and preserve her own life, knowing each lie tightens the noose around both of them? Does she confess that Nelle may still be alive and risk unleashing a chain reaction that puts a target on her back? Does she tell Nina the truth about Delilah and the possibility of another daughter, fully aware that such a confession could redraw family lines overnight? Does she run before the unseen boss arrives, or does she stay and try to fight the machine that created her role in this nightmare? Every path costs her something. Every path hurts someone. That is what makes her compelling, not simply that she might be dangerous, but that she is standing at the exact point where manipulation, bloodline, survival, and desire collide. In the end, this is the kind of General Hospital story that thrives on emotional contamination. Love is poisoned by strategy, family is poisoned by hidden parentage, safety is poisoned by criminal proximity. Redemption is poisoned by the fact that some pasts do not release their grip just because a woman changes her clothes, her job, or the way she smiles at a man who trusts her. Jacinda may have entered Michael's life looking like a surprise, but the deeper truth may be that she arrived as part of a design much older and crueler than anyone guessed. If Nelle is alive, if Delilah's secrets are about to rise, if Nina is connected to Jacinda by blood, and if Ezra is using her while darker forces gather behind the scenes, then Port Charles is not heading toward a simple scandal. It is heading toward an emotional detonation, and when it happens, the most haunting part will not be that Jacinda lied. It will be that somewhere along the way, inside all the lies, she may have begun to want a different life and realized too late that people like Sidwell, Cullum, Ezra, and the power above them do not let their pawns walk away.